Oh, I'm excited about this week's episode of I-501-CU. I'm interviewing Rebecca Fishman Lipsey, the president and CEO of the Miami Foundation, which is the community foundation down in Miami. She's been there 5 years, and what she's been able to do in that short a period of time is nothing short of miraculous. But maybe even most interestingly, she's got such a strong relationship with a board that she inherited, but has evolved over time. So please join me in this interview with Rebecca. All right, as you heard in the introduction, on this episode of I-501-CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I'm interviewing Rebecca Fishman Lipsey, the CEO of the Miami Foundation, which is a community foundation. And we're going to start off by, Rebecca, if you would, share the audience a little bit about your history and how you came to be the CEO of the Miami Foundation.
Sure. Okay, I'll roll back a little bit. My career really focused on education first. It's a passion area for me. My family ended up in this country. They fled here during a war. And really, I think the impact of that, the trauma for them, what they would say to me throughout my youth was, we survived because of the generosity of other people. And the only thing that you cannot lose in a moment of crisis is the education in your head. And, you know, the value of teachers, the value of education led me after college to start out as a teacher in public school. And I did that through a program called Teach for America. I fell in love with that organization, ended up working for the staff of that organization. And they sent me down to Miami to be the executive director of Teach for America here in Miami. An incredible learning experience, leadership experience. And I ended up after that, you know, I saw the inequities in the education system in New York. I saw the same thing in Miami and became really passionate about ed policy. And so I ended up serving a 4-year term on the Florida Board of Education. And when I did that, I founded a social impact venture that had a for-profit arm and a nonprofit arm. And I housed my nonprofit arm at the Miami Foundation, which is how I fell in love with this institution, became really deeply involved in their work and their mission, and participated in a variety of their leadership programs. And when the former CEO told me he was leaving, I had a moment. I went home that day and I looked at my husband. I was like, I'm running my own baby. I grew this company. I love this company. I'm not looking for a job, but I love the potential of this institution. I love what it is for my community. I think I need to throw my hat in the ring.
And you got it.
And I got it. And here I am 5 years later. Yeah.
So 5 years. And so I wanted to talk a little bit, and just to give the audience some context, I did have a chance to talk to Rebecca through another relationship, a situation about a month ago. And I was absolutely fascinated about how you came in, you inherited a board of directors, and you've approached it very strategically. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit. First of all, what does a CEO need from a board of directors? In this case, a community foundation board of directors. And how did you approach it?
Yeah, so I've had a variety of different boards for different companies and organizations that I've led. And depending on what my goals were for that organization at that time, I needed different things for my board. I needed different people on my board, and I needed different influences around me, both to push me, to hold me accountable, to inspire me to be my best in that role. And when I came into this role, it was the very beginning of COVID. And, it was a moment where speed and leadership and bravery was necessary. And I needed to be surrounded by a handful of things. One is leaders who would have my back and help me be brave. Leaders who would help amplify bold things out in community when we were in a moment of transition and where people were really trying to figure out what the priorities were and how they could leverage their philanthropy and what they could do. I needed people who could be nimble and fast and entrepreneurial. And I also needed people who had expertise in my blind spots. I mean, this institution is a massive financial institution, and there are parts of our work that are not my areas of expertise. And so I needed to be confident enough to bring people on my board who that was their zone of genius, and they could help round out my leadership lens. But what's interesting is, I inherited somebody else's and from a different leadership moment for our community. And so I had to think through, first of all, how to maximize the impact of the board that I inherited, how to fall in love with the board that I had, and then also how to grow this board to match my leadership vision, my values, and the needs of my community in this moment.
And so when you got there, how did you even start this approach? How did you evaluate and really gain an understanding of what you had and then determine what you needed?
Yeah. It's a really good question. So in my particular circumstance, I had the benefit of an emergency. Normally, when I walk into a situation where I inherit a board, there would be a lot of assessing and trust building that happens. We did not have time to fall in love with each other. We needed to be leaders together immediately. And because I had that sense of urgency, I remember my first note to my board, which was like, we do not have the benefit of a honeymoon period. Join me. We need to lead in this moment like we love, know, and trust each other deeply. And it led to a fast trust building process. But what I needed to do over the course of those first 2 years was understand, first of all, what are the structures that currently exist within my board? Why did they join? And why did we want them to join? And sometimes that's actually not the same thing. Like, why did they say yes? But also, why did we ask them? What's their zone of genius? And how are we currently activating them? And one of the things that I observed is that there were certain types of leaders we had previously been looking for. And we leveraged them in a pretty consistent way, even though they had radically different skill sets and ways to benefit us. And so, for example, like for many boards, the big thing people want is help me fundraise. But actually, that's not the zone of genius for many of the people that were on my board. And actually, in that moment in time, that's not the gift I needed. I needed marketing genius. I needed financial wisdom and auditing wisdom. I needed communication support on really tailored crisis messaging. And so understanding the skill sets of the people that I had with me and also how I could activate them to love this experience, it transformed what they used to come to us for and then what they started coming to us for.
So you identified their zone of genius. That's very interesting. So through an interaction, questioning, but then the next step is to engage them, to ask them to contribute. So talk a little bit about that. How did you go about doing that, and were they receptive?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think about is, when someone's going to be on my board, I want them to view this organization as one of their top 3 causes of choice. And I think often people are invited onto a board because they're a known entity, because they're a visible leader, because they have a reputation in a certain way, but they're so exposed. They have so many things that they're giving to that they can't actually pour in to the thing that we're doing here. And so I want people for whom they're deeply passionate about this, and they want to give. And then the question is, for me, what is the thing why did you come here? What are you most passionate about? And also tell me about your work, what you led you to be so successful and so prominent. Help me understand you and your brilliance and the most incredible and complex things you've ever led. And by taking the time not to try to solicit them for the things that I need, but actually to really understand who is this person, what is their zone of genius, I then would be able to come through with ideas of how I could leverage them for my board in ways that were totally different than what I might have asked them to support before. And also, I think about, like, let's say you're hosting a buffet party, and everybody who's coming to your party is going to go to the buffet and get a different food. If you only have one food that you're offering on your buffet, it's not a very enticing experience. I need to understand, like, who's coming to this party? What foods do I need to put out? And I think sometimes for me, in circumstances where I either don't have the time or the resources, I'm feeding one food to everybody in a really robotic way, as opposed to really understanding I'm a host here and I'm facilitating an experience, and I will get so much more out of my board if I understand the foods they eat and I offer them.
Well, very good analogy. So are you always recruiting? You hear the term always recruiting. Are you always looking, always thinking about the next board member?
So I am. I wasn't always. And then, I've had moments where I realized I didn't have the succession that I needed. Or also where I felt like my first date needed to be the proposal because I was desperate for the support. And that is not healthy for me. I need only to be inviting someone onto my board when they have proven to me a level of fit and excellence and leadership. And so what I've started doing, I have committees on our board. And so we have board members and we also have committee members. And what that enables me to do is have a dress rehearsal with people for a year or two and experience who are the most outstanding committee members that we have. And they and only they will be invited onto the board. But that's new for us and for me because I didn't have the pacing and the recruiting beforehand. And so all year round, I am recruiting and finding opportunities for people to try us on and for me to build that relationship.
And so those listening, you're always recruiting. You heard what she said and thinking very strategically about it. So you bring the board together, you go through the crisis, you're starting to develop your methodology, bringing on new board members. The inherent challenge is board members that want to do too much. How do you balance and make sure they stay in the governance role and don't get into the business too much?
So the question is too much of what? Because if my board members are being leveraged for the thing that we actually need and they go crazy, giving more than I ever would have asked for, that's fine. That's great. The challenge is when they're giving in an area where actually I don't need that support there, or it's disruptive to have that support there. And this is different for different organizations. I've been a leader of an organization where what we needed from the board was work capacity because the organization was lean. And so being on that board, you're a worker bee. And I've been on boards where the purpose of the board is advisory, or fundraising, or reputational. And you have to know what board you're on. That needs to be explicit because if you're on a reputation and connection board where the best thing you could do is make that phone call to that person that I can't access and open a door and a pathway for me, but the thing you think you're going to be helpful with is hopping over the net and getting into the weeds of the execution of the work of my teams. You think you're being helpful there, but actually I've misleveraged you, and we have a mismatch in communication and expectations. And so I've had trustees where they thought that their greatest value was to be on the team. And where I had to, if you're not setting the expectation of where the greatest value is, people will make themselves valuable and not necessarily in the place where you need that help.
Oh, I like that last statement. So let me ask you this. So you, the board chair, can you talk a little bit about what you as a CEO need from a board chair? What should executive directors, CEOs look for in a board chair?
So this has changed for me over time. But what I need most from a board chair is someone who brings out my greatest leadership strengths. I feed off of the energy of the people that I surround myself with. And I see, and I've had a variety of board chairs over time, I see what comes out from me in my leadership based on who is standing next to me. And there are times where, we will go into meetings with each other and we feed off of each other's energy. And there's parts that I will lead in the meeting and parts that they will lead in the meeting. And so there's skill sets that are valuable. But more importantly, I need someone next to me who unlocks my greatest leadership values and capacity, who I feel trust with, someone who I can be vulnerable with, where I'm not performing my CEO duties for them so that I will win their approval. I have an innate leadership trust with them where I can share and go directly to the hardest thing. And that trust, that allegiance enables so much more powerful a co-leadership than when the CEO is performative.
So when you came in, you obviously inherited a board chair, and then there's succession, maybe looking at the next one. So what is your role, CEO's role in navigating, encouraging the board to select a specific person as board chair?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I will say previously here for our board, we don't have a step up. Some organizations, what they do is, you come on as secretary and then you become treasurer and then you become vice chair and then you become chair. And for the next 8 years what the succession is going to look like. And that can create stability, but it can minimize opportunity in some places where, 8 years from now, what are the needs of the organization going to be? Am I going to even be the CEO? And I've basically pre-picked who's going to be leading in a moment that I haven't seen yet, and where our organization is going to look different. Our foundation is, significantly larger than it was, and is focusing on a variety of issue areas that it wasn't focusing on 5 years ago. I'm glad I didn't pre-pick who was going to be my wingman for this stage. But what I have realized is that without that succession, I need at least one cycle of preparedness. And so I have right now for myself 3 people that I'm thinking about for my next chair. And I'm thinking, first of all, this needs to be the right moment for them. And they need to feel like that. I mean, when you're the chair of an institution of this size, there's an outsized responsibility on you. People are going to call you and ask you about things that you didn't even anticipate they were going to ask about. Your reputation is linked to the organization. And so I'm going through a process right now of engaging people on committees in their committee leadership, where I know it will be one of these individuals, but I'm still allowing for these next 2 years to unfold.
Very interesting. So when the chair comes in, I'm just curious, get a little granular now. How often do you speak to him or her? Is it structured? Is it ad hoc? Just talk a little bit about how you structured and the board is structured to operate.
Yeah. It's a good question. So first, the board at large, we've got about 20 board members. We can go anywhere from like 23 to 17. And everybody on the board, I know their zone of genius, and they sit either on a committee or they have an individual project that they lead as the overseer of that initiative. And that's really valuable for me. Everyone is in some sort of leadership capacity. And then people who are chairing a committee, they serve on an executive board for me. That group meets one extra time before each board meeting. We have quarterly board meetings, which I think is the right frequency for me. It means we're not meeting to meet. And I'm not constantly in a cycle of preparing for a meeting, hosting a meeting, and then following up from a meeting. I have a quarterly meeting. And at our meetings, the chairs of each of our committees give a very brief report if there's a report that's needed to give. And then we usually have 1 or 2 issue areas that we deep dive into. We're either exposing our board to something really important and then digging in and having a strategic conversation, or presenting back on something from a previous, usually 2 topics that we'll go deep into. And then outside of that, it's based on the committee or the issue area. So I have some committees, they need to meet every quarter. And so they meet once a quarter and then they present once a quarter. I have some committees, they don't need to meet once a quarter. And when I came in, they were always meeting once a quarter. And I was like, we are literally preparing an agenda for a meeting and trying to figure out what we do at the meeting to entertain our board members. It is a waste of our time. It's a waste of their time. Cut it out. And so we cut those. Now you meet because you need to meet. And the chairs and the staff liaison, they decide the frequency. As for my frequency with my board chair, it varies based on the season. There are moments, like right now, where there are a lot of changes coming up the pike, both politically and within the nonprofit sector and in the philanthropic sector, where I know based on our work, we're going to need to have more conversations. My comms committee is having more conversations, and where I'll send a note to the group and say, hey, I need 15 minutes of brilliance. And we'll get on the phone briefly and we'll meet. That's totally outside of the cycle. And with my chair, I try to keep them updated on the things that are going on. So I would say we probably speak super briefly once a week, maybe once every other week. And then we have more formal conversations. We'll go out to a lunch or something, usually once before the board meeting.
Oh, okay. Very good. So now you talked before we got on the call or we pressed record that, hey, this is a community foundation. So boards are different for community foundations. Responsibilities are different. Would you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's important to put it into context.
Yeah. So this is not a straight nonprofit. When I run nonprofits in the past, we have one singular mission, and every year we fundraise for the work that we do. We execute specific programs aligned to our mission, and then we determine our goals and plans for the next year. So a community foundation, first, it's a financial institution. We are fiduciaries of a massive amount of assets on behalf of our community, on behalf of thousands of people. We have a relationship with 1,000 plus nonprofits and a variety of issue areas where, based on either our focus or our donors' focuses, we end up engaging in those missions. And my operations are not something that I fundraise for every single year, where the anchor of my year requires me to fundraise for myself. I have an endowment that covers the costs of our organization and operations. And so the nature of what we need in our board leadership is really different than the experience that I had when I was running a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm. So to give the audience context, how big is the Miami Foundation? What's your asset size?
So assets under management, about $600 million.
And how many employees do you have?
So that's a good question. So we have 51 employees, but I'll tell you about 25 to 30 of those are core foundation employees. And then the other half of our foundation is people who are running specific time-based initiatives. Like, for example, during COVID, one of the major needs that we had in our community was helping every kid in Miami get internet in their house because they couldn't go to school without that. And so we knew this was going to be a massive need. We mobilized the philanthropy for that. And then we needed a team of people to deploy to go sign people up for the internet and support that program. It was a team of handful of people, and they knew they were going to do this for 3 years and then cycle off. And so I have about half of my team who is focused on specific initiatives that they are addressing for community or even for our country that we house here at the foundation.
Okay, this is not a small institution. And when you said you're a financial institution, you're exactly right. 600 million under assets under management, and you over 1,000 nonprofits you work with. No telling how many donors, all told, in the history of the organization. This is massive.
It is massive. And I'll tell you, so last year we brought into the foundation over $100 million, and we pushed out into community over $100 million. And so it's not just how much are we housing and investing in the market and all the different funds. It's a bank. There's money coming in, there's money going out on a constant basis. And so we're running a financial institution where the only thing we do is investing in charitable good for our community. But you have to imagine it is both a community leadership source and a grant making source, but it is a financial institution.
No, I love how you frame that. And so I'm just curious, so big. Board of 20 people. How do you determine your strategy, your areas of focus in a given year?
Yeah.
Or over a period of time? Just how does that work?
The greatest gift we gave ourselves was to make a tight, clean 3-year strategic plan. Because you cannot every single year just decide, well, this year, what will it be? Next year will be. No. Most changes also don't happen in 1 year. And so we went through the process of a robust strategic plan, but we did it for 3 years with 4 clear goals. And so each year we're moving towards very specific targets. And it means that my team feels really clear on where we're headed. My board feels really clear where we're headed. All of our constituents and partners feel clear. And it makes sense of all the different moving pieces.
And so you talked earlier a little bit about comms, but I think that's more from an external perspective. So internally, like even with the strategic plan, how do you, what processes, methodologies do you put in place to ensure that everybody is aligned and hearing you, that we're focusing on these 4 areas?
Yeah. So I'll say 2 things. The first is before I even get to strategic priorities, the most important thing I need to align my team on is the values of this organization. And this is an obsession for me as a leader. And every single year we go through a process of revising and then reissuing and learning about our values as an organization. And we recruit and onboard and actually do performance management that is anchored not around my strategic priorities, but around our leadership expression of our core values. This is the way that I lead. And it's very, very important to my leadership style and to the identity of this organization. On top of that, we're not just producing widgets, we are executing things that are of priority to our community. And every single person on my team, their department and they individually have goals that help move forward the 4 big priorities for our organization. And not just one of the priorities, everybody plays a role in all 4 of the priorities. And so we feel like we're holding it together.
Oh, very, very good. So I know there's some new CEOs out there listening, and I'm just go back to your 2020, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give them, and what would you recommend they do in regards to their board and setting the direction of the organization?
Yeah. I hear from many of my peers that board management is really stressful for them. And the thing that I'm experiencing right now, 5 years in, that I wish for myself in those first few months, I felt like I needed to prove myself so badly. I am a young-ish woman in a very large, visible leadership role. And I felt in my first few months or even years, like I needed to prove that I deserved this job, that I was qualified to lead in this institution. And a lot of my energy related to how I interact with my board was me either self-analyzing and overthinking what it is that I'll put in front of them and how it is that I come off and how I prepare. I wish that I could go back. First of all, I'll give myself a hug Feel like you were exactly where you're supposed to be, breathe. But also, that I will have, and my board will have, a transformationally different experience. They're asking themselves the same question. Do I deserve to be at this table? What value do I offer? Like everybody, it's kind of like when you walk into a party, everybody's feeling socially awkward, but no one thinks anyone else is feeling socially, that like, this is the most talented, best intentioned group of people. If we could all just release, and have fun with each other and co-build with each other and trust, like really this game is about trust and relationships. The faster you can get there, the better the more you'll achieve with this group, and also the more memorable it will be for everybody involved.
Give yourself some grace, leaders out there. Think of the long term and build that trust. Wise words from Rebecca. Rebecca, I can't thank you enough for coming on this podcast. You've been absolutely, I know what you're doing down there in Miami. You're really changing the community and making such an impact, and I commend you for that, and I thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you.
All right, here we are with Recapping with Reed. We just listened to Rebecca give us some board engagement gold. Reed, what did you think were some three takeaways?
My first takeaway from Rebecca is her committees don't meet just to meet, and that was something that might have been happening when she got there. Her committees meet when they need to meet. Some of them it's bi-yearly, twice a year. Sometimes it's quarterly. Other times it might be more frequently, but they meet when they need to meet.
Yes, and the board only meets once a quarter. Imagine that, once a quarter, because she said they don't need to meet more frequently, and it makes those meetings meaningful. So good point. And number two.
When she is talking about her board that she inherited, she needed to figure out what structures existed inside of the board already, why the board members joined, and why the organization asked them to join, because that isn't always aligned, and then how they're currently being activated as board members. She talked about this in quite a bit of detail.
Yes, absolutely. Very good. And number three.
We often talk about board members maybe overstepping their bounds. We want them to stay at the governance level. And I really liked how Rebecca worded this. She said, they might be just giving too much, and they might be giving in an area where the CEO or the organization doesn't currently need support. So as the CEO, you need to help direct your board members to the areas in which you do need support, in which the organization does need help from them. You need to set the expectation of where it is they can provide the most value, or else people will make themselves valuable in other areas.
Yeah, I did like how she discussed that in the wording she used. You're absolutely right. Sounds like she has really grown into that role and understood how to get the most out of her board, which I would guess board members love because they're able to contribute. So really, really remarkable job she's doing. And thank you for recapping with Reed your 3 points from Rebecca. And I will 501c everybody next week.